Welcome to the December 14th, 2022 meeting of the Edina Planning Commission. Tonight, there is one public hearing. Individuals who want to provide testimony remotely for the public hearing can call 786-496-5601 and enter conference pin 405-8184#, and then just be sure to press star 1 on your telephone keypad when you'd like to be placed into the queue to speak. An operator will introduce you when it is your turn. Please just state your full name and address before speaking. Everyone will be allowed up to 3 minutes to speak, and staff member Liz Olson will let anyone who calls in know if they have gone over those 3 minutes. And remember, you do not need to call in or comment live tonight if you've already provided feedback. And also, please do not provide information already presented. Provide testimony if you have new comments or information to bring forward. So with that, tonight, I will go ahead and call our meeting to order and kick it off with a roll call.
Commissioner Padilla.
Present.
Commissioner Miranda.
Here.
Commissioner Alkire.
Here.
Commissioner Hu.
Here.
Commissioner Gandhi.
Here.
Commissioner Strauss.
Here.
Commissioner Bennett.
Here.
Commissioner Olson.
Here.
Chair Agnew.
Here. All right, next on our agenda is our approval of our meeting agenda. So I'll entertain a motion to approve that.
I move to approve the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, our agenda has been approved tonight. Next up is our approval of our meeting minutes from our November 16th, 2022 meeting. I'll entertain a motion as such.
Motion to approve the meeting minutes from November 16th.
Second.
Any changes to those minutes at all? All right, seeing none, I will vote. So all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, those minutes have been approved. Next up is our community comment. So we will hear from residents in person who would like to speak about something not on tonight's agenda or scheduled for a future public hearing. You may speak for up to 3 minutes. After giving your full name and address, the green light on your podium will turn on. You will have 30 seconds remaining, or when you have 30 seconds remaining, the yellow light will turn on, and when you're out of time, the red light will turn on. Is anyone here tonight to provide community comment? Seeing none, we will go ahead and proceed to our public hearings. So first up is a site plan review with variances for 5100 Edina Industrial Boulevard, and Director T will present tonight. Whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. This property is located in the Cahill Industrial Area, just west of Highway 100 on 77th. The property is guided in our comprehensive plan for office uses and also has a zoning designation of planned office district. Here's a look at the existing building on the site. So it's a 20,000 square foot office building on stilts, so the parking is underneath. The applicant is proposing to tear this building down and build a 4,200 square foot bank with a drive-through. When this application came in, one of the focuses that staff had was preserving these large locust trees along the east lot line. City Forester reviewed the site, found them to be in really good condition. The rest of the trees on the site, not so much, but these trees were. The applicant's original proposal was to remove all of those trees. They had a row of parallel parking in that area, but they have since revised their plans, and the revised plans, the City Forester believes those can be saved. So here's a look at the bank with the drive-through in the rear yard. In the front, Part of this request is we have a requirement in a commercial zoning district that the first floor be at least 20 feet tall. A portion of the building, this portion here, is 20 feet tall, but the entry where there is a conference room, that's 13 feet tall. So there's a variance there. We also have a requirement for a 75% opening for facades that face public right-of-way. The front of the building that faces 77th is code compliant at 80%, but the side that faces the off-ramp has the vault to the bank right here. Can't have windows for the vault due to security, so that's at 60%, that side of the building. So a variance is requested there. There's a look at the front of the building. So currently today, as we saw in that picture, there are 2 access points into the site. With this project, they would be eliminating the access that's closest to the intersection, which would help things on 77th in the intersection. So it would be one way around the building to enter the drive-through. There's parking spaces in the back and also parking spaces in the front. In terms of the number of spaces required, are required 14 spaces, and they're providing 21, so it is code compliant for parking. It's also code compliant for the number of trees proposed, existing, and proposed. The drainage plan, there would be a pond in the rear and also in the front. City engineers have reviewed the plans and found them to be acceptable. Here's a look at the landscaping, so you can see there would be trees all along the perimeter. Those locust trees that we saw would be right here. As long as they're part of the conditions here would be that they would be protected during construction to help ensure their survival. So this request requires a site plan review with those 2 variances that I mentioned. So here's a look at the compliance table. It meets all of our setback requirements, building height, the drive aisles, and parking, again, is all code compliant. Primary issue is the proposed variance is justified. So staff believes that they are reasonable given the small size of the proposed building. The portion of the building would be 20 feet tall on the first level. Part of this is due to the security needs, as I mentioned, for the vault. The front of the building does meet the 75% transparency requirement. It's just that side that faces the off-ramp. So again, a portion of the building, it will be 20 feet tall. There's no buildings in this area that have that 20-foot first floor ceiling height, and also don't comply with that 75% transparency. That's a new to our code. It's about 2-3 years old. So again, here is that vault that's preventing the 75% on that site. We did not receive any comments on Better Together, and the staff recommendation this evening is for approval subject to the findings and conditions that are outlined in your staff report. With that, I can stop and answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Teague. Who'd like to get us kicked off? Please go ahead. Bit more about how people are going to get in and out of the bank, because that is kind of a nasty intersection.
Yes, so let's see. They would utilize essentially the western existing entrance to the site. So they would enter right here off of 76th.
So you could take a right or a left, like depending on which way you're going. You could, if you're going
Correct. Coming out, yes.
west, okay. Was there a traffic study done or anything?
Yeah, good question. Because the existing office building is 20,000 square feet, so the use there today generates more traffic than the bank would. So we did not require a study.
Commissioner Strauss.
Yes, thank you. Director Teague, I don't know, I'm looking at the compliance table, and that's 75% transparency. You did mention this is a new thing, because I was thinking I don't remember this being part of any previous deliberations. I mean, I was kind of surprised. So can you expand on what why the requirement?
Yeah, this came out of the Southdale Design Experience Guidelines. The ordinance was adopted during COVID when all of our meetings were virtual, but that was one of the recommendations.
Maybe
Out of
perhaps,
that study.
did this apply to like the Bank of America project?
Yes. Yep, there
What were
have
we
been
talking
some
about?
PUDs that didn't meet this. So it was written into the PUD to not comply.
And the intention, I mean, so the transparent is, it's this glass, as a material to sort of give an openness to the building versus,
Yeah, it's proving to be, this is just what I'm hearing from developers as they come in, that 75% is a bit excessive. Might be something that we want to consider in the future. Is that the right number? Should it be 60%? And again, we have done some flexibility with PUDs to reduce it from 75% to be a
and
little
it's
bit
very
less.
possible that they could meet that 75. You have a 60 to 80% proposed. So.
Yes, the front of the building is at 80%. The side that faces to the south toward 77th, it's the side that faces the off-ramp toward Highway 100, where that big vault is that prevents the 75%. It's at 60%.
Okay, that's it. I just one other comment. I mean, I looked at the site. Was that the building on stilts and parking under? Was that just the rage and at some period? Because I
Yeah,
know we had a project where the building was over a Berry Road where it's the same thing but that was just a fashion for.
It was, yeah. We've got another one. You mentioned the one on Berry Road. There's the one over on Eden on the other side of
Yes.
Highway
Okay.
100
Yeah.
there as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Additional questions? Commissioner Alkire.
I just wanted to continue with Commissioner Strauss's questions a little bit. So the west and the north side do not have to comply with the 75% because they're not public facing? Is that the word you used?
Correct. Yep.
And what does that mean exactly?
Where there's right-of-way or a public, like the promenade.
Okay.
The building was facing a predominant pedestrian public access like that, that provision would kick in as well.
Okay, so if it's just a property line or an adjoining building or an
Public
adjoining
right of
parking
way.
lot, that doesn't count.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
I also want to build on to that. Even though they weren't taken into the calculation, those other sides of the building, do you happen to know what the percentage transparency is of those additional two?
I don't. Perhaps
Okay.
the applicant might have an idea, but
Okay.
I don't.
Thank you. Commissioner Padilla.
Yeah, just two questions. Does this represent a change in ownership? And is there a bank in the building? Is this bank in the building now?
There is not. This would be a change in ownership.
Okay. And is the second floor or the currently occupied? And what would happen to the tenants that are there?
The entire building would be removed.
So the
Yeah, and
tenants
this would be
leases would be bought out and the tenants would move.
Correct. I don't know all the detail in
Okay.
that, but
The other concern I had is I understand that there was no traffic study done because we're coming in at far less building square footage and parking and all of that. But I think the parking or the traffic flow would be very different if there's a bank there and it's my understanding there'll be three drive-through lanes in addition to obviously a lobby. And I'm just wondering if any thought has been given, because that's a fairly busy, I know it's not quite at the corner, but it's a fairly busy intersection with a lot of people going into the gas station, which is across the street. And I'm just wondering if any thought has been given to the issues that might come up, because instead of a lot of traffic being there, at commuting hours, instead it's going to be all day long, the traffic flow.
yeah, initially our engineers, took a look at the plan, and it's their recommendation to remove one of these drive aisles. This is the site today. You can see the two entrances. And their recommendation was to have that new drive entrance as far away from the intersection as possible. So that is what's proposed.
Okay, thank
Commissioner Hu?
Oh, thank you. How long would construction for the bank take?
Probably a question for the applicant. Generally, banks tend to go up pretty fast.
Commissioner Miranda?
Yeah, we had a proposal from a bank at the last meeting, and they didn't have a transparency variance request, right? That was just a signage request?
Correct.
Okay. So banks can do this, but this one isn't.
Yes.
Okay. And then I'm trying to understand the 20-foot height variance necessity. No other building has this in the area because we just passed the ordinance, so that's not going to happen. But this is sort of this is actually literally the entryway to the neighborhood that we're studying now, and we hope to redevelop in a much better way. So I would think that it would be pretty important for this. So I'm looking for like a reason for the necessity of this.
Yeah, that's certainly up for question because we're starting from scratch here. So if we want to hold to that 20-foot height requirement, we certainly can.
Okay, thanks.
Any additional questions? Commissioner Bennett?
Yeah, it seems like this more or less complies. And we've seen a lot of banks this year. Just to better understand what could be on this site, the zoning allows for 4 stories, 48 feet, correct?
Yep.
And that's the whole stretch north of there? Or does it step up? I'm just trying to get a better perspective of how this fits into the area, because some of those buildings north of there are taller than 4 stories.
Yes, along the freeway, I believe it's 8 stories. I'd have to check my.
So it changes as you get north. I was just curious why this was lower and if it was a transition zone.
Yeah, when that height overlay zoning was established, it was based largely upon existing buildings.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
All right, seeing no additional questions from fellow commissioners, I'd love to invite the applicant up, either to give a presentation if there is any, but I do know that there are also some questions from commissioners, so I'd love to get those questions addressed. Welcome, and you can feel free to use the handheld if that's most comfortable, or stand in front of the podium.
This is fine, thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Just wanted good evening and thank you, commissioners. My name is Mike Elsenbeater. I'm with First National Bank North. We're located in Walker, Minnesota, kind of up in the lake country. We have a few small branches up in that area. We have one in Baxter and also one in Cross Lake, in other communities in north central Minnesota. I'd like to thank Carrie and the city staff for the assistance with the planning process. We're here today with plans to, as you all mentioned, as Carrie mentioned, with plans to replace the stilt building located at 5100 Edina Industrial Boulevard, and replace it with, we feel, is a beautiful new bank building. We feel the project will complement and improve the area from its current condition. It's a nice looking facility. As Carrie spoke, we're going to have one exit off Edina Industrial Boulevard more to the west, which would be safer from 100 there. We're also going to be extending the sidewalk by Starbucks from the west over to the east. And we will keep real pristine green grounds, provide amenities, banking, insurance, and investments to residents and businesses on the west side of Edina or the west side of 100. I know there's plenty of banks in Edina. First National Bank, it's a family-owned community bank serving north central Minnesota since 1902. I'm a third-generation banker. I have 2 kids that are in the business, so they'll be 4th-generation bankers. And for many years, our existing customers They live in Edina, they live all over the metro, but they have cabins up in our area. And, we have a couple thousand customers right now that are, from the area that they often request, and we feel we need a facility in this area to better serve them. A lot of our business is business owners and subcontractors, and we were looking for a facility that was on a major freeway for access, but also build something that had nice drive up with space that we can get trucks or trailers, that type of thing, in to do business. And I guess in addition to this, our family is very familiar with Edina. I lived in the cities for 10 years and went to St. Thomas, and I worked at National City Bank at 69th in France, which is the BMO bank today. My sister worked at 70th in France at U.S. Bank, and my son worked up at 50th in France at U.S. Bank for 5 years. And we have a lot of other family members, fourth generation, that live in the metro area, and we plan on having one of them kind of run this branch. So appreciate the opportunity here today, and hopefully you approve our plan. So if you have any other questions, I have Eric's right here. I didn't see it. You moved up fast. We got Eric from SRA. We also have Frauenschuh back here to help answer some questions. So
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Who'd like to kick it off with questions? Please go ahead.
Okay, to reiterate my question from before, do you know how long construction would take for the bank?
I'd probably ask Ross that question, probably. I'm guessing 6 months, but. Excuse me.
Yeah, 6 months would be the time that we'd expect for it to take.
Did you have any other questions for them? Okay. Commissioner Padilla.
How many employees will be working at the bank?
We'll start out with it was probably 4 or 5.
And are there any other local branches in the cities?
Do we have?
Right.
Yeah, no, we don't.
In looking at the sustainability questionnaire that you filled out, you say that the building will not meet the energy goals of 2030, and you will not be employing strategies to conserve energy. There will be no renewable energy at all, and I see you have a flat roof. And I'm wondering whether or not it's possible those items could be rethought or looked into at all.
I'll probably have Eric answer that.
Thanks. Good evening, Commissioners and Chair. My name is Eric Reiners, Principal at SRA and leading the design efforts for First National Bank North. Sustainability is a very high priority for us, and it's incumbent upon us to incorporate whatever we can when we can on all of our projects. The 2030 initiative standards are set quite high, and just the baseline energy code in Minnesota is a high benchmark, and which we will meet. As far as additional steps such as photovoltaics or solar panels on the roof, green roofs, those on such a small building are just not very practical. Even wind generation, not practical. So for those reasons, they're not incorporated on this particular project.
And what about like silver LEED certification?
I'm sorry?
Silver LEED certification?
LEED certification, again, we endeavor to incorporate LEED eligible components and materials whenever and wherever we can in the buildings, and work with our owners in setting those priorities. But the actual certification process is not always a priority to our owners, and in this case it wasn't. So it's not currently in the plan to be or seek out LEED certification.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Elkhare.
Thanks for being here tonight. I've got 3 questions, so they're all related, so I'll just ask them all at once. So how did you come to 31 as the desired number of parking spots? And how did you get comfortable with 24?
Yeah.
And the third question is, could you be comfortable with even less? Because we've come down quite a bit already.
Yeah.
Given that it seems like banks are a lot about drive-through these days.
Yeah.
So let me know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, great question. So the original parking plan was not as much about the number of spaces as it was about providing spaces, those parallel spots along the east boundary of the site for oversized vehicles. As Mike indicated, they have a great deal of clientele in the construction industry and trades, and we're seeking to serve those clientele and not at all or ever limit their access to the banking facility. So those were originally intended for oversized vehicles or even vehicles that might be pulling trailers or utility equipment on a visit to the bank. So that part of the parking plan has been sacrificed, not in spaces, but in availability to oversized vehicles. Could further reductions be made? I think that would be a difficult one. Although they're planning to start with plus or minus 5 employees, we have space for many more than that in the branch, and as traffic picks up, I imagine that they'll use all of those staff spaces to the north and still want to preserve those 13 spaces for customers at the entry.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Strauss.
Yes, on one of the views, it showed a sidewalk running, across the entire front of the property. There's not an existing sidewalk?
There is not.
It didn't look like, so that's going to be quite, but then it will match up to one that is, you said at the Starbucks, so further to the west there is.
Yes, Commissioners and Chair, we also developed the adjacent property a number of years ago. And at that time, we were asked to add that boulevard sidewalk in front of 5108, which is that multi-tenant building that houses Starbucks and a couple other tenants. But that sidewalk gets to the property line with 5100 and ends. And so part of our site plan is to continue that across 5100 to the intersection corner.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Commissioner Olson.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question is about how did you land on, it looks like to me 4 lanes of drive-through. Do you need that many, and how did you land on that number? It seems like a lot.
Well, that comes from our client. We have one teller window at the building, 2 additional drive lanes, and then the ATM lane at the remote end. And that's a direct result of the programming for the bank and its clients and utilization that we received from First National Bank North.
Any additional questions? Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, could you explain the need for the 20-foot height variance for the front of the building?
Yes, I was gonna raise that. There's a series of requirements in the planned office development zoning district, which this parcel falls under, that has language, and Carrie can correct me, but it seems pointed directly at much larger parcels. It refers to a clear height of 20 feet across the entire first level, facade lengths greater than 200 feet, and first vertical 60 feet of facade materials. And of course, that all of those things combined seem to be referencing a much larger structure than this particular parcel could ever accommodate. In our case, we wanted nice volume for the banking floor and lobby, but in 4,200 square feet, it wasn't really practical to put a 20-foot ceiling in the restrooms, in the private offices, in the vault. in the vestibule. So for that reason, for those reasons, in those particular spaces, we used a more practical ceiling height.
Okay, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, I mean, I think that came from the Southdale guidelines. And my understanding of those is that the whatever 200-foot facade thing was, about single ownership buildings basically owning the block or several blocks or whatever. But my understanding of the 20-foot height requirement was that it allows for repurposing of buildings in the future. And so, because today, basically you just tear a building down and build a new one. And the idea is that we were trying to get away from that. So, and I presume, you wouldn't put a 20-foot high ceiling in a bathroom if it were in there. You would just put a false ceiling in below that or whatever. But, it's something that I think, like I said before, when I was talking to Director Teague, this is part of an area of change in the city, and it's looking to be something closer to what's along in the Southdale area, not today, but what's planned for the Southdale area. And so the idea is that this is like literally the cornerstone building for the entire industrial neighborhood. So I think, hewing to those guidelines is pretty important from the way I look at it. So, I mean, other things about this building is that it's in a sea of asphalt. It's a tiny little building. You're what, one-fifth the size of the existing building? And it's all, surface parking, something else the city is trying to get away from. So this doesn't really fit with, kind of the vision the city has for the future in terms of Southdale area guidelines and whatnot. So these regulations that we do have, I think, it's really important to stick to because they're sort of the foundation for what the city's vision is. So thank you.
Any additional questions before we go to our public hearing? All right. Well, thank you.
And then in terms of the vault, is there any way that, could the building be pushed forward and the parking put in the back so that the vault would be, where parking is? I assume you don't do it during business hours. I don't know how vaults work.
We did study a number of configurations, both for the building plan and program and on the site. By pulling the building south, we could never get it as far south as we wanted to because of the tight site circulation that's required immediately upon site entry. But by remoting the parking, we continually ran into situations where vehicles and pedestrians were crossing, and we wanted to limit that to the greatest degree possible. And so that's why we do have staff parking remote at the north end, but we have that opportunity for guests and visitors that intend to enter the building to do so directly from in front, rather than in any kind of remote scenario where they may be crossing vehicular traffic using the drive-throughs.
Well, there's parking in front, right? So the building could be placed where the parking currently is, right? So it could be moved, I don't know.
But then we'd have to relocate the parking.
Right, to the back.
To the back somewhere.
Right.
And then anyone wanting to enter the bank would likely be crossing vehicular traffic, because the drive-through lanes are also, the site's too narrow to get the drive-through on one side or the other.
So couldn't the drive-through lanes be behind the parking?
They could, but again, I think we're introducing even more bituminous, less opportunity for green space interruptions across the site.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Alkire?
I'm sorry to go after the vault again, but it's still not clear to me why the vault has to be where the vault is, and why that has to be a constraint on the transparency on the east side of the building.
Well, there are other plan options for that vault, but there's particular processes where it has to be directly adjacent to, that require its adjacency to the teller lines. And we have other functions that need to bookend that teller line as well, mechanical, staff, private spaces, and those don't have any more transparency opportunities than the vaults did.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask Carrie a question. Director T, can you just say a few words about our guest comments about the applicability of the 20-foot for a building, the 20-foot height requirement for a building of this kind? It seemed, I had thought it was pretty black and white, but it seems it's being interpreted with some gray.
Oh, in terms of the intent of the...
Or its applicability on this project?
Oh, it definitely applies here, the 20-foot first floor ceiling requirement. And Commissioner Miranda's recollection of the Southdale guidelines is accurate. We did talk about it often in regard to larger buildings and repurposing that first level, but it does apply to single-story buildings as well.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe you covered it, Carrie, but how much of that first floor needs to be the 20 feet? Is it the entire?
The entire
floor?
First floor, right.
I have a follow-on then to that as well, Director Teague. It's 20 exactly. It couldn't be more than 20 if they still wanted to have that variability.
It could be more.
Okay. Okay, thank you. All right. Any other questions? Otherwise, we will go to our public hearing. All right. Well, thank you so much. We may have more questions after the public hearing, but thank you. All right, so we will now hear from residents who would like to provide testimony. To participate, call in now at 786-496-5601 and enter conference pin 405-8184#. Everyone is allowed up to 3 minutes to speak. Please give your full name and address, and staff member Liz Olson will let anyone who calls in know if they go over the 3 minutes. And remember, it is not necessary to provide testimony if you've already provided comments via voicemail or bettertogetheredina.org. Please call in if you have new comments or information to bring forward. And so with that, we will start with anyone in person tonight who would like to provide public testimony for this public hearing. Seeing none, I will look to see if we have any callers for tonight.
I currently do not have any callers, but due to the slight delay in the broadcast, I recommend we wait 1 minute before proceeding. My watch right now says it is 7:39, so I will come back to you at 7:40 or when we have a caller, whichever is first.
Thank you.
Thank you. It is now 7:40, and I still do not see any callers, so I think it is safe to proceed.
All right. Could I please have a motion to close the public hearing?
Motion to close the public hearing.
Second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, the public hearing portion has been closed. And so with that, I will open it up to commissioners for comment discussion, starting with Commissioner Olson.
Thank you. Thanks again for your presentation. I think as the architect, it's a beautiful building. It looks nice, and I respect the fact that it's a local bank. My comments are less about what you've done here and more about the appropriate use on this site. I feel like this would be a beautiful type of use in a second or third ring suburb. A first ring suburb developing, I see it as maybe a wasted opportunity where we could have gone up a little bit higher, a little denser use for what we want. And I also have a lot of concerns about sort of the air quality and the environmental impact, not just of your project, but Commissioner Miranda, I believe it was, who spoke about the asphalt so much. But there's a gas station across the street, 4 teller lanes that idling cars, and then you already have a very dense intersection with a lot of idling cars. And I just feel like this is a missed opportunity for us as the city to do something that's more appropriate for this site.
Thank you. Additional comments? Commissioner Miranda.
Yeah, I mean, we welcome new businesses in the city and whatnot. Be great to have you here, but I'm just struggling to see what the necessity for these variances is. I don't feel that there's anything really compelling here, and so I'm just struggling to come up with a reason why we should do this, because the city has many policies and plans, such as the Southdale guidelines and the 20-foot minimum, for example, where we're trying to keep buildings close to the street and have, as Commissioner Olson said, more density. And, if there were something that you were trying to do something like that and you came up against a constraint, and I'd feel much more willing to give a variance if it were something that were, truly necessary. But I just don't see anything being a requirement here. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. I think the positives here, what were covered for sure, is, the business side of this and the economic stimulation you're providing by redeveloping and bringing new business to an area of the city that could use more traffic and could use a facelift is nice, and just rooted in the community is important. And I guess what we struggle with, or what I certainly struggle with, is, you own this property, you're entitled to do what you want to do. However, there's areas in our city that we designate as these districts, and we have goals for how those might change and redevelop. And so I think the struggle for me is, while this checks most of the boxes, it does seem to be going backwards in a lot of ways of the specific site, just being a cornerstone site. As was mentioned, it's like a 20% reduction in usable space of the building. So I think that's some of the struggle, is with how Southdale is written, is, that 20-foot really applies to larger buildings because it's trying to establish a strong first floor and anchor it there. So I guess how it relates to my perspective here, I can support the variance for the 20-foot because I think if you presented everything at 20 feet, it would look like a box. And I think the articulation of different levels and heights is appropriate. And I'm just picturing raising that front up. I don't think that makes the building look any better. I think this provides a nicer appeal. But the transparency, I don't see how you couldn't make that work. And so I'm struggling, as was mentioned, to entertain that variance when I just feel like we're just not getting a redevelopment support a much more bold and dense future in an area that should be redeveloped in that direction. So that's where I'm at. I support the variance for the height, because I think what I'm looking at looks nice for what it is. But if that were all 20 feet, I don't know how much better it would look. I think it might, again, look like a box. So that's where I'm at.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Alkire.
Thanks again for coming in tonight. I really agree with what Commissioner Olson said about a preference for higher, denser use of this land, although ordinance says that if you own the land and you want to build a single-story structure, you can do that. So what concerns me about this is that the variances seem to be driven by design choices rather than real constraints of the site. Like Commissioner Bennett, I'm more troubled by the transparency variance than the first floor height variance, but I mean, the general sentiment I have is that there's plenty of room on the site for creative solutions to these things. I can't imagine that we can't find a different way to use this site to accomplish your goals that wouldn't need a variance. And having said that, it would be great with all that space to find some way to have the visual impression from the main street not be blacktop and parked cars. It just seems like with all the space on that lot, there must be a better way to do it. But that's a choice. My main concern is about the design choices that are leading to the variance rather than the constraints of the site. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Padilla.
Yeah, I'm a little bit of two minds on this. I think it's a beautiful building. It would be lovely to have a First National Bank in Edina, and we would certainly welcome your business. But in terms of this being the right site, I don't know. I have great concerns about the traffic flow in and out of there with everything else that's going on that street and all the traffic. And I have less of an issue with the variances requested than I do with kind of the lack of progressive elements that I see being put into this building. So, and the specific site. So I see pros and cons. That's where I'm sitting right now.
Thank you. I think that I echo a lot of my fellow commissioners' thoughts, although I think the one that I would disagree with Commissioner Bennett on is if you just equally raised up everything by 7 feet, I think you could, avoid that boxy look of it and still meet the requirements. And so I think that Commissioner Alkire, you said it really nicely, of these tend to be design decisions that are leading to needing the variances. And I think given the size of the site, I don't see the compelling reason to grant these variances tonight. I think that, I go back to what our role of planning commissioners is, and it's really to look at, what are the guidelines of our city, what are the ordinances of our city, and really hold to that where we can. And I think that it was good to have some of the discussion too around the sustainability components to that, because another plan of our city that we need to be thinking about is the climate action plan that we have and how together we're going to meet those goals. So again, thank you for coming in. It was a great presentation, and it does look like a beautiful building. Any additional thoughts from fellow commissioners? Otherwise, I would entertain a motion tonight.
I'd make a motion to deny the variances from the site plan review of 5100 Edina Industrial Boulevard.
Second.
May I offer some findings, please?
Yes.
So you could, with that motion, based on the finding that because this is a new building on the site, we're essentially redeveloping a vacant site with the tear down of the existing building. There's no physical circumstance on the site that creates a practical difficulty in meeting the first floor and the transparency variances.
Okay, I take that as a friendly amendment, or do you want me to say that again?
You could accept that as a friendly amendment.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional discussion before we move to vote? All right. All those, I think Commissioner Olson did. Thank you.
Chair, to be clear, we are voting, an aye vote is to deny.
That is correct.
Okay.
Yes. Commissioner Olson? Is it too late to ask a question? No.
Was there any thought so there are current businesses at the site. Was there any thought to doing a 2 or 3 story building so that you could incorporate the businesses that are already there?
Commissioner Ross Hedlund with Frowen Shoe. There's a drastic difference in rent costs for the existing tenants and new construction tenants. So if we did do a multi-story building, it'd need to be different tenants.
Thank you. Any further discussion or questions before I move to the vote? Okay, so all of those in favor of the motion to deny, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That means that tonight this motion, or the request for these variances have been denied, and that recommendation will go on to the City Council. Thank you very much for coming in. Okay, next up on our agenda is our sketch plan review for 5201 Grandview Lane, and that is also presented by Director Teague.
Okay, thank you, Chair, members of the Commission. So as mentioned, this is a sketch plan review. This property is located just to the west of the Grandview District. So this is a look at the zoning map. The site we're looking at is this corner property. So all of Grandview Lane here, this hatched markings over the properties indicate that this is zoned for duplexes. So these are all duplexes on Grandview Lane. There's an apartment to the west with a planned residential district designation, and also to the west this way and to the east. The site is guided in our comprehensive plan for low-density attached residential. Again, it's this slightly darker yellow area. The applicant this evening is, you're probably familiar with the Hankerson townhomes that are located just around the corner on this area here. That site was re-guided to medium density residential, which is the request this evening. So here's a look at one of the land use maps from the Grandview study. This is the site, so it's essentially just outside of the study area. Again, this corner here, you can see the apartments to the east and to the west. Here's a look at the existing duplex on the site. So the proposal is to tear that structure down and build a 3-unit townhome. One would gain access off of 52nd and 2 off of Grandview Lane. Quick rendering of what the buildings might look like. Again, the site plan. With this site, and I'll show a diagram in a minute of the required setbacks, but as proposed this evening, they would need setback variances on all 4 sides. It exceeds our building coverage requirement, 30%, and this proposal is at 34%. Within the PRD3 zoning district, which is what they would be looking for, we require for each dwelling unit, you need at least 4,400 square feet. This site is a little bit small, so a variance would be needed. Each unit would have 4,300 square feet. The density, this would be a comprehensive plan amendment to increase the density to allow up to 10 units per acre. The current density allowed is 8 units per acre, basically the duplex that exists on the site due to the size, small size of the site. So again, a comprehensive plan amendment is required and a rezoning with those variances. So the red line here indicates the required setbacks. So you can see they're relatively close on all 4 sides. If the structures were reduced a little bit, could likely meet the setback requirements and in turn would meet the building coverage requirements. Some of the issues that staff has identified is the market value of the existing structure is considered naturally occurring affordable housing. We would lose that with the replacement of 3 units on the site. As we discussed with a similar sketch plan that the commission considered a couple of months ago on Valley View Road, they could tear down the existing duplex and build another duplex on the site. So they could remove that naturally occurring affordable housing on their own without a rezoning. Again, the properties to the west and east are higher density, but this would be just one site. We might want to consider, similar to the what we discussed with that last project, considering density on the entire block as part of a bigger study when we look at the future areas of change. This is another one that we need to look at. So again, I guess I will stop there, answer any questions you may have, and the applicant is here to present as well.
Thank you so much, Director Teague. Commissioner Strauss.
Director Teague, you may or may not be able to answer. I guess what I'm asking is what they're proposing. I'm going back to the original Hankerson townhome project, and I think it did start with a greater density than what they ended up with, and as I remember, we had a pretty full house. It had generated quite a bit of attention in the neighborhood.
Yeah, the original proposal was for high density, and a number of units were removed, so it fit into the medium density classification.
Okay. So what's proposing, my opinion is that the townhome project that helped was quite successful. I mean, it's sort of for everybody, and I'm just wondering if that has sort of settled over the neighborhood too, like they're perhaps much more comfortable with what's being proposed here than what they didn't know was coming.
Yeah, it's hard to say what they would think about this. It is the same builder, same developer, same property owner even. With that one, as I recall, even at the sketch plan we were hearing from the neighbors, some opposition. We haven't heard anything yet.
Okay.
It's posted on the website, but we haven't actively sought their opinions yet.
All right. Thank you.
I had one question, Director Teague. I think it was on slide 13. It references in the paragraph about the affordable housing, 4 units that exist. Are there 4 units on this site today or 2 units?
There are 2 units.
Okay.
Yes, that typo.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Director Teague? Please, Commissioner Miranda.
So is the city, it sounds like the city is a little bit concerned about not so much rezoning the lot, but the comprehensive plan amendment, because everything else on that block is zoned the same way, right?
Correct.
So this would be not only a spot zoning, but a spot land use sort of thing, which is kind of messy. Okay,
Correct.
thanks.
From a process perspective, what would, for example, just kind of playing out this, if we wanted to do an amendment that was broader in scope for that area, is that something that could be pursued through the Planning Commission today, or would that have to take place in the comprehensive plan process that will be kicking off here shortly?
Yeah, I think if the council could authorize us to move forward with a comprehensive plan amendment that would include all those properties, what we would have to do is notify them that this is what we're pursuing. So it would be a little bit longer process. We would need to get them involved, but that is something that we could consider, yes.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett?
Yeah, just to tack on to that, I believe that's happened in the past too, where maybe in the process of a PUD where there was a zoning change and it changed to the characteristics of that zoning in that area. I'm thinking of Grandview. I think it was the Trammell Crow development, the bus garage site.
Yeah, it was just one property. The city didn't bring in additional properties with that project.
I think maybe it was because of that, then it got introduced during the comprehensive plan update too. And maybe that's when it happened. So I remember there were questions during that to make sure, like, by approving this rezoning, that's not changing the zoning in this whole district with that category. So
Right. Yeah,
Okay.
with that one, we needed to adjust the densities. So the densities were increased, right? The land use wasn't changing.
correct.
Commissioner Alkire?
Director Teague, I know the history questions can sometimes be challenging, but do you have a sense of how this happened? It seems really unusual to have this one block of low density surrounded by high density on three sides and then R1 on the north. Did the high density that's around it, did that used to be low density and it just got chipped away into high density, or do you have a sense of how that happened?
Boy, that's a great question, how that came to be. I don't know, but we could take a look at dates for when those apartments were built compared to we could do some research on that to find that out.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions for Director Teague? Otherwise, I will open it up to our applicants to come up and make a presentation.
Here's your PowerPoint. I'm going to need to do that from my computer.
Okay, that's fine.
I'll have you start with this.
That's fine.
I can get it ready.
Thank you, Karen. Good evening. Steve Benke with Donnie Homes and Traditions by Donnie, and Liz McDonough, the landowner, is with me here. And I wanted to thank you again for giving me the opportunity to try to interest you in a project of ours. I think I'll start while Carrie's trying to get our narrative up here. I'll hit the questions that were left from right before I got up here. For Commissioner Strauss, the neighbors. Generally, the neighbors have been extremely happy with the project. I mean, I know that there's maybe some individual people who have had issue during construction with the alley being blocked temporarily, not being able to drive right through while a dumpster is being placed, things like that. That's completed. The building is sodded, completely sodded, landscaped. As a matter of fact, the last unit sold. Basically, within about 2 months, the entire building will be occupied. And that's about a 2-year process, I guess, or about a 1.5 year process. We've gotten considerable feedback from certain neighbors that were very impressed by how close the building looks to the graphics and the modeling that we had provided at Planning Commission and Council. And I'd be certainly welcome to have that ready when we get this project to that point as well. Generally, when I'm working in my 3D programs, I'm really trying to be as accurate as possible with what I'm showing, just because you don't want to show something that you're not really building. It doesn't make any sense. For Commissioner Agnew, the unit count in Grandview started at 13, and we ended up with 8 through a couple different iterations, and that generated more acceptance from the neighbors, but it also contributed to the changing of the price point of the product. And I think we all realize that has to somewhat go hand in hand. As far as spot use zoning, I agree it's kind of odd. However, the idea that came up later about this whole area, I think when you look at the surrounding area, you realize exactly what was stated. You have this sliver of R2, which predates both the building to the west and the building to the east, but not so much the building to the south. So you have 3 apartment buildings surrounding this sliver of property. These twin homes generally, obviously they were built at different times as well, but generally this area was developed along with the rest of the Brookview neighborhood, and most of the twin homes they're generally, they have the same kind of age as the single family homes in the area. With that said, these buildings are 60 and 70 years old, some of them. And that is generally why you see us before you for redevelopment. Buildings today are more durable. I mean, that's what the building code is for. The buildings today have some newer products that are more durable than the old ones. Sometimes that's not the case, but generally we look for a product that has the ability to last for 100 years from now, as opposed to when they were necessarily built. Standards today are significantly higher than they were then. The question of the surrounding PUD too, I think, kind of leads me into trying to address the issues of the variances. The city of Edina doesn't have a townhome zoning classification. So essentially, the zoning variances that you see there are because we're being asked to conform with apartment-style construction, just as any of these adjacent apartment buildings would have the same setbacks that are being applied to this acre lot. Half-acre lot. So, when you see that very small envelope in the red, that is what happens when you apply the PRD3 zoning to this. If the city of Edina had an R3 zoning, and they don't, but just other cities do, it could address missing middle houses that are more in the character of the surrounding neighborhood. So, for example, even though we have all those variances, every one of those setbacks that we're proposing meets an R2 type project. So the adjacent buildings have that same front yard setback. If this was a single family, we'd be required to meet that average front setback. So that variance would go away then. So I think that's part of the issue that we have here. And when we're bringing these new projects to you, we really don't have a good place to fit them in without jumping to what's essentially a high-density zoning characteristics. With that said, what we're trying to do here is to bring in a townhome product that is basically a 3-plex, where a 2-plex is there now. If you want to think of them that way, maybe it's a little easier to address it. It's not a big 4-unit building. It's like our other one. Here we had 2 4s, now we have a 3. It is modestly increasing the density on the site. It brings in one more landowner in the end to help absorb the costs of redevelopment. I think we have to remember that when we go in to redevelop a property, we have to remove the existing building. We have to create new infrastructure for the new building. But for having that additional unit to sell, all of those costs go on to a new building, which is why we sit here and talk about how we're trying to get the affordable housing down, but yet our price points tend to keep going up. And the median price in Edina is, was it now $600,000 or $700,000? These actually are proposed to be in that range, in the middle sixes. If this was to be a 2-unit building and replace the one that's there, now you're looking at 2 units that are selling for $800,000 to $900,000. The economies don't work quite the same unless you can increase the density. And I know density increase is also something we're looking for in the city. So I think modest increases, as opposed to what we talked about in Valley View 2 months ago, I think a modest increase here is probably more acceptable, more palatable, given the size of the properties and the neighborhood than something even more dense on the site. So with that said, we are proposing to create a 3-unit building that has characteristics very similar to our building on 54th and Drew. Now that was a duplex, replacing a duplex. It was done 15 years ago. The cost differences between then and now are magnitudes higher, just in terms of what we're required to do in a redevelopment situation, just in terms of what we're required to pay for materials and other products at this point. This building also turned a corner. It had access onto Drew, and it had access onto 51st. The building is all composite materials. It has characteristics that are similar to, not identical, but similar to our single-family redevelopments that we do. It's all coming out of the same office. It's all coming out of the same contractors, the same quality of people. Our interiors, this is our interior of our unit over on 49th, right by 50th in France. Again, it was a duplex replacing a duplex, and that building sold, those units sold at just under $1 million, again, because of the costs involved with the redevelopment. So when we can come in and increase the density a little bit, we do feel like we're able to keep our costs more in line. Okay, with that said, I'm able to jump back then, Carrie, by using that. I see it, okay. And then I'll just do, okay, we're in, I'll just get rid of this. All right, so what we are planning to do is face one of our driveways onto 52nd. I noticed that the chart offers a 17-foot setback here. I actually have it scaled as a 20 on the plan. The big difference here is that versus the 30 on the front is just like Hankerson, we have excessive width of right-of-way on 52nd Street. So our distance to the curb is really the same as if we did have a 30-foot setback. And from what we understood at some point was that 52nd Street right-of-way was based on that area being a bus route, and that there was possibility in the future of that road being widened. But clearly that's not the case currently. Our side setbacks would meet any R2 or single family setback, given the size of the lot. The building basically has 3 units, has the entry on the north end unit, everything faces 52nd. The other 2 do face Grandview. The building characteristics, again, it's all a composite, not hardy, but LP product, so it's very durable. It comes with 25-year warranty. The whole maintenance issue on something like this is very easy to understand, very long life. I would point out that that street currently has 1-story, 2-story, and split-level units on it. So this fits right in with that. It's 2-story from the front. It's actually split level, but the the back of the house has the higher ceiling. That definitely fits the neighborhood. It does have a walkout because of that, because it meets grade that way. They're about 1,800 square feet. 4 bedrooms, up to 4 bedrooms, up to 3 bathrooms. You could have a porch on the back if you wanted to. If somebody wanted 3 bedrooms, they could have a very large family room downstairs. I don't want to make it seem like it's a stereotypical product of ours. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of product out there that could have these same features. Generally, what we're finding at Hankerson is all but one of the units had a finished basement. So basically, everybody was finishing the house 100%. A lot of people today wouldn't like to have that, well, I'll just finish the basement later thing and save some money now. They don't want to have to deal with it later. So basically, a lot of the basements get finished right away. Very large rooms. I mean, I guess that's really been the characteristic of this plan, is that the rooms are very large. The real, I think, focus for our sketch plan is how do we address the issue of the PRD3 versus more of a townhome character. In other words, is it that we have to grant all these variances in order to help push the authorization for you guys to maybe create an R3 zoning to handle this going forward? Do we push this as a guide plan change so that we can try and get this whole area thought of as a medium density area? I think that's really where we're trying to go with right now. The sketch plan for this, it would generate a proposal for development sometime in the spring or summer. We do have a little bit of time here to talk about it, perhaps with the council, or we're going to see them next month, and I'll offer them the same comments. But I do think that if the city of Edina wants to accept more of the missing middle product, everything except the highest density missing middle is missing from the current zoning code. And I think the more that we can, acknowledge that, maybe we can figure out a way to help get these projects in for development. Perhaps they don't even need variances anymore. We can just get site plan approved and just move into construction. Thank you.
All right. Questions maybe we start with, and then we can get into feedback. Please go ahead.
So as townhomes, in each unit, they all have their own separate utilities, so they all have their own sanitary and water connection to the street.
Townhomes, by definition, will have individual utilities, fee simple lot, most importantly, fire sprinklers. So we go from a twin home that doesn't need sprinklers to a townhome that is sprinkled. So now all of a sudden, those homes, those new ones that we're building, are protected. Fire department has taken that many more units off their I need to get there fast list.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Alkire.
I wonder if we can go back to the compliance table. I'm just wondering how tall the building is.
Director Teague, would you be able to pull that up?
Yeah, that's...
Thank you.
2.5 stars.
2.5, Carrie? 2.
2.5 is the code requirement.
Right, and it's a 2-story from the street.
So is it less than
What's the
30
height?
feet? Is it 30 feet or less?
It is 30 feet, and part of that is the desire to create an elevation that is more consistent with new product in Edina, as opposed to, I do have a fairly steep roof on there, and part of it is to create a little bit more, I hate using the word interest or drama, but to create more relief and definition on the front of the building. than what the last version I brought in for Valley View had. I mean, I did listen to the comments about the building image I had for that one, and that area probably wouldn't have supported this level of architecture, but clearly we've already established with Grandview Townhomes that, you know, a little bit more aggressive architecture is certainly welcome in this area. With that, I have a taller roof, but there's no living space up there above the second floor.
Thank you.
Commissioner Bennett.
As always, appreciate the explanation in detail. Helps to understand where you're coming from and where we could go. Have you, I mean, overlaying this to what is there, it seems like it's kind of encompassing one part of the L, right? The existing structure goes east more, correct? Yeah, that's the overlay. Have you considered a different layout here? And I'm just thinking of smaller, you know, maybe a one-stall garage, and even accommodating another unit on site versus only 3.
Yes and no. I mean, I looked a little bit at staggering the building more. Given the buyers at Grandview, I don't, unless, let me see what's the best way to phrase it. Clientele that we're finding, I don't believe would support a single car garage. The people that are there are currently dual incomes, both have jobs. At least one of the units has 2 electric cars. We actually wanted to add another charging port for them. So even though, you know, they have gone that way, they still have 2 of them. Virtually there's only one person in there that I know of that only has 1 car, and she's a single lady with family.
I guess to your point, though, you know, the market and what those sold for is quite a bit more than the number you mentioned here, too. So if you're targeting a lower price point, I mean, even turning the corner where, say, along Grandview Lane, you have the 2-car garages, but maybe on, you know, the cross street, you have 2 units, but each has a single-car garage, and it's a different clientele. I mean, kind of to your own words, is this targeting a different clientele, I think, right? 600, so.
Does the 4 units push us to, well, but this
it probably makes it impossible, but.
This gives us up to 12. And if we're at 10 now, 1 more.
Given the small size of the lot, it might get you into a high density.
Yeah, it could push us over that.
Yeah, I'm just curious because I mean I'm looking at the footprint of what's there, and you're not taking up that footprint of the existing building, you know. And there is a structure that extends almost to the property line, and I think people are a little more palatable to, you know, what you're putting there is replacing the footprint of what's already there, even if it's more efficient. I mean, we're trying to get a little more density in our community and doing it creatively, so.
I think the only thing here is it eliminates 3 backyards. Well, 2.5 backyards.
Yeah, at least 1 backyard.
Well, no, there's one unit that would be unit to unit, so the one in the corner, and then the one where the garage is now would have to share a backyard with the other unit next to it. So the only unit that really has a backyard is the one labeled 3 here. I think that starts to become more of a conceptual thing about how the units are designed to be marketed. You know, if this is a family, you'd think that each one would like a backyard. All the rest of the units in there currently do. Now, obviously, this may force some redevelopment on the rest of them, but you know, what's going to happen there? Are we going to densify all of those so that there's the backyards are more and more limited. We're getting in the weeds on this.
Yeah,
right
no,
now.
it's just, I'm going that way because, I mean, kind of what I'm seeing here and some of my perspective is, like some of these other developments, like just big garages, big driveways, big curb cuts, and some of the elevations just seem a little too massive from the bottom to the top, and some of that's with a design choice. And I think if you broke that up into more narrow units, kind of like the Grandview townhomes that you built, like those are probably as tall as this, but they're narrow, so it looks a little nicer instead of stretched out and stretched up. So
true, but it also had the alley to handle the secondary access, and this would not.
Yeah.
And because of that, you need to provide space both for vehicular access and pedestrian access. So, you know, these units are about 26 feet wide, and I've found that I can physically make them 24, but you really lose a lot, and you don't really gain that much in terms of width, like for another unit or something like that.
yeah, and I guess that was a question towards more of a single garage, just design-wise, it just wouldn't look so garage heavy.
I think doing so, I'm going to make the unit much deeper, and I'm going to be back into that lower level backyard area that's there now. Just in order, because even if it is a single garage door, I think you're going to end up with a tandem.
Mm-hmm.
You'd end up still with two stalls, even if it's for storage. And because of that, the unit's probably going to grow about 20 feet in depth.
I mean, the width of, well, I think I disagree. I mean, the units are at least 40 feet deep from what you're showing.
48.
Right? Yeah, so you'd have it.
Right.
Just some questions, and just, you know, is this the only thing you've considered versus kind of sweeping around the corner? I think what's nice about just how it looks now is those streets are kind of offset, so, you know, you turn a corner and turn another one, so you kind of see two sides, and you're kind of doing that there, but it just seems like you have more space available to work with. Sure. That maybe provides a little more creativity. Just interested to see what else you were thinking.
Well, just keep in mind that every time you've made suggestions at sketch plan, I've typically brought something back for the submittal.
Yeah.
All right. Other, Commissioner Miranda.
I'd like to dovetail on that. So the really great thing about this property, though, is that it is on the corner. And so even though there is currently no alley, there's no reason why you couldn't put an alley in, because you have the corner. And that could set the precedent for the entire block.
Cover.
And so, because alleys are not very wide, right? So it's not like a street or something. So that would allow you to, I don't know if it would allow you to increase the density, but it certainly would allow you to have either one garage or stacked garages. And then there's no entrance from the front. And then you could potentially move the housing closer to the street if you wanted a bigger backyard, because the cars might be coming in from the back. And then it looks like a village. I mean, I'm looking at a picture here from the Grandview Development Framework, page 18, you know, and it's kind of pretty much what that is, which is, you know, a 12-foot front yard or whatever, something very small. And then you're really getting the space in the backyard. So, and that would make the front, you know, as Commissioner Bennett said, make the front much more palatable. And if people use that street to get to, from the neighborhood to get to the shopping area, then it makes it much better for bicycles and stuff, because there aren't cars constantly coming, and pedestrians, because there aren't cars constantly coming in and out of the driveway. They're all coming in from the alleys. So I think it's an opportunity that we don't have in many places. So. Everybody loves a village, right?
Well, yeah, and I'm thinking now too, so.
Any other thoughts from commissioners? Commissioner Elkhire.
I think this is really interesting question for us to consider. And I mean, on the one hand, I can look at what you're trying to achieve and be supportive of increasing density on one lot and finding a way to make space for another family in this neighborhood and think that's a great idea. On the other hand, makes me a little bit uncomfortable because although I think there's a really great argument for making this whole block medium density, as a city, I just wouldn't think the best way to go about that would be one lot at a time. And so as much as I could get behind that, the specifics of what you want to achieve on this spot in the city, my preference would be, let's take a look at the block.
Sure.
And figure out what the right solution for that block is, particularly since the lot that we're talking about is the one that happens to be closest to the R1 part of the neighborhood. So to me, that's probably the hardest place to do this. Right. So I might, for me, as a commissioner, I might choose a different process to get maybe to the same place you're trying to get to.
Right. And I'm hoping that this, especially with us going to council beginning of next month and having pretty much the same discussion with them, then hopefully we can jumpstart something here, because I don't think it's really reasonable to request the landowner to wait through the next comprehensive plan cycle to see.
It's a good long way away, yes.
To see a change here where I think the suggestion of, oh, come on. No, so I thought the suggestion perhaps of trying to see if this could be done prior to that or in concert with the work that's going on leading to that was certainly something we'd love to explore. So.
Thank you.
You too.
Commissioner Miranda?
Yeah, the other thing I'll say in defense of the single garages is that there are very, very few places in Edina where transit is accessible. And the E line is coming in, replacing the 6 bus. There's the 46, which goes to Grandview and goes, I think, to St. Paul, all the way to St. Paul. And that basically goes along 50th Street and 46th Street. So there is, transit nearby. And it would lead, even if they didn't take the 46 very far, if they just took it to France Avenue, then they could take the E line, they'd go to the U of M, they'd go to Uptown, they'd go to Southdale. If there's any place in the city where we could do that, this is one of those places we could do.
I agree, and I think also it feeds into the issue of the walkability of Grandview being right there. But to me, that also is what supports the idea that this should be a medium density area. I think those things go together, and I think it's a nexus of where this can all work. So I think that argument is as valid as mine that this should be a higher density area.
Commissioner Padilla?
Yeah, I would agree with you both that this could and possibly should be a higher density area, but I will pretty much make the same comment that I made about the Valley View project, which is that I think the neighborhood needs to be looked at holistically, and we need to take a picture of what is working for the city and the people that live there, and the fact that it's close to the commercial area and transit, and come up with more creative and workable solutions to a larger number of people and in a greater context. And I think that there are more and better ways to come up with middle price units. So.
Yeah, I would echo a lot of those same thoughts myself. Like, I would love to look at this block in particular, and Commissioner Miranda, I think the terminology of even calling it a village, I think, is really interesting, because there's only so many areas, right, where it kind of is its own thing. It's the one, I know there's a lot of residential in that area, right, but the one block kind of sticks out. And so I think it'd be really interesting to see what we can do with that. And Commissioner Padilla, agree with you. We should be thinking about it kind of in the context of the broader area. Particular things that I do like about it are just direct suggestions. And I appreciated that you already mentioned this, right? But my reaction was that the pitch seemed very high. And especially if we are thinking about it as one single redevelopment within the existing block, I would feel that we'd get a lot of challenges that it doesn't fit within the existing context of the neighborhood.
Sure.
So that's one thing to be cautious of. I'm supportive of adding the incremental density. Love the ideas and the discussions around having just a single garage, especially given the location and the walkability of this area. Being able to walk to Jerry's, I think, is just so appealing for a lot of people. And so those are just a couple of things about this site in particular, but it is a challenge, I think, to the city council to think about, what potentially might want to be done with this block or village. All right, not seeing
Thank you.
anything else. So
Thank you
you
very
so
much.
much for tonight.
It's great to see you again.
All right, next up on our agenda is an election. So this is my last planning commission meeting ever. So I will no longer be planning commission chair, which means starting with the next meeting, y'all are going to need a new chair. So we will go through an election for that. Starting with the chair position. So I would like to nominate, if I am able to nominate in my current position, I think that I am. I'd like to nominate Jimmy Bennett to be chair.
I would accept that.
Are there any other nominations?
Sure.
I second the nomination, Commissioner Bennett.
All right. Seeing and hearing no other nominations, let's. Do we need? I hate this part. Do we need a motion, or is it just a nomination?
I think it's just
that
the
we?
nominations, and
Okay.
if that's the only nomination.
All right.
Talk this over. Yeah, we talked this over. So, I mean, in some context, I am the vice chair right now, so it's kind of logical, and I'm looking forward to that. But if I move into that, the vice chair position's open too. So,
I think we'd handle that as a separate. We have to get you out of your vice chair position first.
yeah.
So I think the only thing, right? The meetings start at 7. That won't be a. All right.
The doors.
I adapt. I adapt.
All right. So, all those in favor of electing Jimmy Bennett to be the chair of the Planning Commission, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Jimmy Bennett will be chair beginning next year. Well, next meeting, I think it's next year.
Thank you.
Which, to your point, we now have a vacant vice chair position, and we need to have a nomination for that.
Yeah. So if I could, I would nominate David Alkire.
And I would like to welcome us all to the Bennett era and say that I'd be honored and delighted to be vice chair.
Second. Any other nominations we'd like to consider? All right, I will go ahead and put this to vote. So all those in favor of electing David Alkire to serve as vice chair of the Planning Commission, effective next year, I guess, as well, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Congratulations, both of you.
Thank you. Very excited.
Change.
All right. That concludes our elections. Last up is, well, second to last, the penultimate is chair and member comments. Commissioner Alkire.
Yeah, I do have one quick one that I wanted to share tonight. This came up in a conversation with Addison Lewis, who I think probably most everybody on the commission knows. And the reason it struck me was that, so often we hear about the downsides of development and density, traffic, pedestrian challenges, all of those, pressure on the school district and what have you. And I've always been a little frustrated that the necessity and the upside of density and redevelopment isn't given enough airtime in our city. And this example came up yesterday that I wanted to share with you. And so this has to do with 3650 Hazelton Road, which was Guitar Center in 2018. And their total tax bill in 2018 as Guitar Center was $93,000. Would anyone care to guess what the tax bill for that same address in 2023 will be as the Bower? $1.24 million. So, and 300,000 of that goes to the city, and 490,000 of that is school district funding. So to me, that's a pretty stark example of what we get as a city, as a community, from projects like that. And that doesn't even count the affordable housing buy-in that property paid or the park dedication fee. So just something to carry around if you ever wanted an example of what these kinds of projects can do for our city. That's all.
Just to add on to, when there's like the other side of traffic too, foot traffic that comes from that site. Now you have all those people living there and invested in that community, using the promenade. That's a great benefit too.
All right. Commissioner Miranda, I think you had something as well.
Yeah, I just thought it interesting that everything we voted on tonight was unanimous. That's a rarity. But no, I'd also like to point out there was an article in the Star Tribune this week or last talking about, guess what, I'm not talking about bicycles, but I am talking about climate change. Where large trees used to be the most common species of tree in Minnesota 200 years ago. And now they're dying off because there's a beetle that survives the winter. Our winters have become so warm that the beetle that feeds on them survives through the winter and is now decimating the forest. So in the past 20 years, we have lost half of our larch forests. And they're important trees because they grow in swampy areas that most other trees don't grow in. So climate change, is really having huge effects in a very, very short period of time. So as much as I liked that first proposal this evening in terms of having another new business in Edina replacing, a terrible old building, the kinds of things that it was shooting for, I just don't think are ambitious enough for what we need as a city. So I was glad to hear us unanimous on that. So thank you.
Well, so I'll just say I have loved my experience on the Planning Commission. I don't know if I've told this to everybody, but I think it's a funny fact that I think I applied to a different commission, and I was like, the Planning Commission? I don't know much about zoning or land use. And I only say that not because I like to highlight how inexperienced I was, but just to say that I felt so welcomed and supported in joining the Planning Commission, even though I only had one meeting in person before the pandemic hit, and which was funny because it was the townhomes one where we had so many people in person, and it was quite an introduction to the Planning Commission. But I have learned a lot over the years, and I think that this is just it's been a fascinating kind of opportunity to get to engage with our city in this way, but I think more importantly, it's been an amazing group of people to work with. And I think, Lou, to your point, kind of fun to see us be unanimous on some of these decisions, even though I also really like a lot of the discussion that leads to the ones where we are more split, right? Because it isn't always clear, but it is fun too when there's something that we all kind of see not necessarily aligning to the vision of our future of our city. So thank you for the opportunity to serve and be with y'all.
Perhaps just a quick update on the Cahill area. I haven't heard where that's progressing.
Well, let's see. We had our December meeting just last night. And I guess to characterize where we are at in the process, it's the work is starting to look like an area plan, where we're in the Cahill. We have identified, likely land uses by kind of sub area of the district. We haven't really yet tackled the connectivity to and through. That's going to come at the very last part of the project. We have our third workshop. I think it's the third week of February. So we'll be making sure everybody knows about that. The date, we just set the date, so I'll send that out to everybody this week, so we all have that on our calendars if you're wanting to attend. Anything, that's just the general overview?
That's what
Okay. I'll send out the date of the workshop. Thanks for asking that question.
I even wonder, David, if it's appropriate for us to send out that recent packet just from yesterday's meeting, because that's the first one where we actually had literal sketches that were done up, and I just thought it was really interesting to start to see visions for that area in and of itself rather than imagery from other developments that have happened, and those stuck out to me. So I just think that fellow commissioners would appreciate that. Any other comments? Otherwise, I'll hand it over to Carrie.
Just a quick update from City Council. The council did approve the subdivision on Macaulay. Remember, that's the one that was on Arrowhead Lake. So they did approve that, and they held the public hearing for the Keys Restaurant, and they will make the decision, the West Side Cafe, they'll make that decision next week. And we would invite the commission, if you have the time, to stay a couple of minutes afterward to thank our chair for her service and wish her well in the future. That's it for me.
All right. Well, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you.